Hello and welcome. This is 15-minute mastery, a chance to put a brakes on the day midday to gain clarity and reflect on where we are, where we want to be, and how big of a gap there is between those things. So just to review, in previous 15-minute masteries, the first thing we started with was the X factor, and that is the character trait that defines, that is really the divider between a life lived on purpose and a life not lived on purpose. The 2-ingredient recipe for awakening, which was radical self-honesty and radical self-compassion. The third episode, we talked about what is the self when we're referring to self-care. And last time we came together, we talked about getting really familiar with the innerverse, right? There's multiverses. Every single person is a little universe, and getting to know what's going on in your little universe, and awakening to that and become aware of that is really the beginning of not just self-reflection, but it's the beginning of self-awakening and self-actualizing. Last week we talked about, getting familiar with the innerverse, the little universe that exists within all of us, the thoughts and the emotions that are going on, the beliefs that are going on in the background. So I'm going to share a really great tool for gaining insight into the innerverse today. And when I came across this tool years ago, my ego really did not like it. My ego did not want to consider it. My ego did not want to accept it as something that is real. Really railed against it. And that is anything that bothers you about another person. Anything that pushes your buttons that another person does, you can be sure that you've got that same characteristic, that it's in you. Yeah. And this is, if you've studied psychology, this is classic projection, but we can't see it in another person unless it's already in us. But the ego is always trying to hide from the things that it doesn't like about itself. And so as a mechanism for getting away from it, for not seeing it in itself, it projects those undesirable characteristics onto other people. But the irony is that the tool that the ego uses for getting away from it, for hiding it, is the very mechanism that is the ego's undoing. Because once you've projected it onto somebody else, it's right in front of you. It's right in front of you to see it. And it's the person who's willing to reflect and humble themselves to consider, is this in me, is the person who can actually heal the trigger. So if we can recognize that it's in ourselves and see all of the ways or any way that it manifests in us, and if we can somehow accept that about ourselves and even love it, even find something good about it, then that trigger can die. And then when other people manifest that characteristic, it won't bother us anymore. It won't push our buttons, and we can maintain a calm and regulated nervous system. So yeah, the first time I heard about this, I was like, there's no way that's true. She is a B word and I am not. I love it. There was a certain person in my life that was really just constantly on my nerves, and I didn't have the maturity or the humility to be able to reflect and see where I could be just like her. And turns out, upon plenty of humble self-reflection, years later, and hindsight's 2020, right? Oh, I had a lot of those same characteristics. So I have some quotes to share that, lots of philosophers and psychologists have taught on this very concept, and they don't all call it the same thing, and they don't all talk about it in the same way. But if you really pay attention, it's there with many, many philosophers' works. And I have some quotes. This one is, people do not seem to realize that their opinion of the world is also a confession of their character. That's just another way of saying it, and that's by Walter Emerson. Another quote, to overcome monsters in your life, you must first conquer the ones within yourself. And this one, similarly, the greatest triumph is not in defeating the monsters outside, but in conquering the ones within. There you go. A great book for doing this work, and some people call this shadow work, a great book for walking you through this difficult work, is called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers by Debbie Ford. Okay. It's actually not a very thick book. It's a pretty quick read. but it's not an easy read.
What's the author's name?
Debbie Ford. The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. And sometimes there are characteristics about ourselves that we are aware of, right? So the example I gave is that when we're not aware of them, but sometimes we're aware of things that we don't like, but we know that they're there and we really, really don't like them. We're embarrassed of them. We're ashamed of them. We feel guilty. And the real trick that Debbie talks about is when we identify those things and we realize we're pushing those aspects of ourselves away from us. If we can change the way we're looking at that aspect of ourselves and find some way in which that aspect is good, some way in which that aspect of ourselves actually helps us, actually serves us, then that aspect can stop being so loud and obnoxious and can really turn down the volume and be more balanced and show up in more appropriate ways instead of the ones that continue to make us feel embarrassed because we don't want to feel embarrassed. So that's the tip for today. The mirror, it's really called the mirror effect in my book. The law of mirroring. Anything you see in another that bothers you, you've got it.
I love it.